There is a club in this world that you do not join knowingly. One day, you're just a member. This club is called the Life Changing Events Club. The fee to join the club is hurt beyond belief. It's payable in full, upfront, and it's a lifetime membership. The benefit of the club is a newfound perspective on life and a deep understanding that you may not be happy about your current situation, but you can be happy in your current situation. My family and I joined this club on January 16th, 2018, when our only son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. This is a day I will never forget. My son and I headed to the pediatrician's office to go do a sleep study. He wasn't sleeping at night. He was drinking constantly, waking up to use the restroom, and he was just lethargic. Within 1 minute of walking into my pediatrician's office, the doctor said, "Let's run some tests." Before I could wrap my head around what was even going on, we were being rushed to U of M hospital. It was hours before I understood that my son was being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. How? How, I asked myself, does my perfectly healthy son, who is active, thin, physically fit, being diagnosed with diabetes? It was because I had only ever heard of type 2 diabetes, a disease that shares some similar attributes, but is vastly different. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. It's a disease in which there is no cure. More than 200,000 people this year will be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It's a condition in which the beta cells that are located within your pancreas give up. They stop producing insulin, making the person insulin dependent for life. There is no cure. And it can take up to 12 years off a person's lifespan. In 2021, it's anticipated that the diabetes-related health expenditures was roughly $380 billion. Yet, there is still no cure. Type 1 diabetes and the signs and symptoms are something that in my life I had never heard about. I had heard the term juvenile diabetes, but because somebody of any age can be diagnosed, they've now just moved on to calling it type 1 diabetes. Before the discovery of insulin in the early 1920s, children diagnosed with type 1 simply died. Some of the more fortunate were kept alive for a few months with a starvation method that was a treatment protocol to restrict food for days at a time that allowed their blood sugars to level off. A person with type 1 diabetes must take insulin every day or they will die. No amount of healthy eating, exercise, or carefully concocted herbal remedy or keto diet will ever eliminate the need for insulin. A person without type 1 diabetes can think about eating. Their pancreas starts to produce insulin to prepare for the food they're going to eat. If I decide not to eat that chocolate cake, my liver then will dump a little bit of glucose to balance off the insulin. The problem is, in a person with type 1, their pancreas does not work. It gives no insulin. So a day in the life of a type 1 starts with, what am I going to have for breakfast? We calculate the carbs. Let's just say he's going to have a bowl of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. We will measure out the cereal. We know that it's 46 carbs for a quarter cup. I then have to inject him with a certain amount of insulin using a carb ratio. And then he has to wait 15 minutes before he can start to eat to give the insulin a time to work. Colin is also a hockey player. So when he goes to hockey, that's a lot of energy. So we know now we have to give him less insulin. And if he goes low, that requires coming off the ice and having a juice box or some fruit snacks or a quick acting sugar that's going to raise his blood sugar. It's so important to be educated on not only the signs and symptoms of type 1, but also what it means. If I had a nickel for every time somebody asked me if my son could have a brownie or a cupcake, or every time I was chastised for giving him a brownie or a cupcake, I would be rich. The fact is, he can eat whatever he wants. He can eat the same foods that any other child can eat. We just have to give him enough insulin to cover that. Whether he eats one grape, which is one carb, or he eats one Skittle, which is one carb, we give him the same amount of insulin. The symptoms that I didn't know are thirst, excessive urination, wetting the bed, losing weight, being lethargic. We hear about kids dying all the time because their parents aren't aware of the signs and symptoms. And at pediatricians' offices, to this day, are not regular checking children's blood sugars. There's often many key factors that happen before the diagnosis occurs that could have caught it much earlier. So today I challenge you to know the difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, to know the signs and symptoms. And if you see a kid wearing a Comm, which is a blood glucose monitoring device, or an insulin pump, just know that nothing they did or their family did was the cause of their disease.